In our dashboard, we've got the last two sections here, which talk about the cost of developers' equity, and they talk about the hurdle rates. And there is the only difference between the international version and the Australian version is that there is an entrepreneurial risk margin in the Australian version, and that is used to calculate the project-related site value, which is not applicable the in the international version. So that area is left blank. So international users do not have to worry about what that actually means. So let's go through each one of them. So we've got cost of developers' equity, and there are three different injections allowed. So let's say you put in the money in, and you had a line of credit that's using 7% over there. So you can put in 7% over here, and the interest that will be calculated on the money that the developer actually injects will be compounded in all scenarios. And you can have these different equity injection 1, 2, 3. At this stage, all you have to do is just put in that when the money comes in the first time, the second time, or the third time, it'll come in at 7.5 and 8%, or it may come in at 7% everywhere, or it may come in at different percentage, different percents. It just depends upon how you want to do it. And if you want to come in and select a simple interest, the calculation will be simple. That means it'll be a flat interest rate on the time that you are using it. Otherwise, it will be based on the compound interest. By default, when the sheet is created, it is compound. And even in the international version, it is exactly the same thing. The only difference in the international version is that I've got days in a year which says 365, and in the Aussie version, this 365 days is in the budget where you can actually put in those days. So this number of days in a year, some people put in 360, some people put in 365, and it's there so that if you allocate that I want my interest to be calculated based on 365, it will be done on 365 based on the number of days you actually put in there. So in terms of hurdle rates, so let's look at the hurdle rates. We've got net present value. We discussed about that in previous videos, what it is. Now the target development margin, this percentage is used to calculate. So if I go in here and go into my bank summary, and I show you what my bank summary is all about. So here we've got the residual value of land, and in the bracket it says target development margin. So in this scenario, I've got 15% set up over here as my target development margin. You can change that to 20% if you wanted to. It's exactly the same in both in both scenarios. So in the international version, I've got 20% set up, and in the Australian version, I've got 15% set up. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever. You can change that to whatever percentage that you must make on this as your development margin for this development. And this percentage is actually used to calculate the residual value of land that you will get over here, which is telling me that it's about 3 million over here at 15% target development margin. So that is telling me that if I must make 15%, I can afford to pay $3 million for the value of the land. Or if I calculate that per unit, it'll be 274,924 per unit. That's what it actually means. This is the number that you specify that I want to make. If I'm taking all this risk, I'm going to go through all this trouble of doing this development, I must make 15%. And when you put that number in and you put in all your costs and everything, you figure out the value of the land that you should be paying when purchasing the land for this development, not a dollar more. Because based on your assumptions that you have made for your feasibility, this is the maximum amount of money that you can afford to pay for the land if you want to make 15% development margin on the project as a minimum. So that's what this hurdle rate does over here. The entrepreneurial risk margin is this 20% or whatever you allocate over here. If I go back into my dashboard and see this entrepreneurial risk margin 15%, this is used to calculate the project related site value. And this would come in over here at 15%. Usually banks want to see anywhere between 15 to 20%, and in I've just put in usually between 12 to 25. You can put it anywhere you want, but what you want to understand, the correlation between this percentage is that if the bank wants you to chip in more money, they will increase this entrepreneurial risk margin. They will tell the valuer that make sure when you do the valuation of this project related site value, this is at 18% or 20%. And this would actually reduce the value of your land, which basically would which would mean that you will have to chip in more money. And these are the things that you can go and argue with your valuer and everything. And I've done that in the past, and fought with the valuer and the bank, saying that, where did you pull out this 25% entrepreneurial risk margin for a project that looks like this, or whatever the schematics of the projects are. So if you're in the international version, you don't have to worry about it. There is no section over there. Now, sensitivity is basically on the sales and on the costs. So if you put in 5% here and 5% there, what you are saying is that when we do our sensitivity analysis right here, you are scaling up the cost and scaling down the sale value and the cost in increments of 5% or whatever value that you actually put in over there. So if I make that cost to be 3%, for example,